Okay, how are you guys doing today? We will continue talking about Immanuel Kant and his critique of pure reason today. Like I said last time, this is absolutely amazing and tremendously important work, and I want you to understand some of the most important features. Hopefully you watched the previous video and you understand the background, which we talked about last time. Just to remind you, who was the Copernicus? Copernicus has come up with an idea that it was not the Earth at the center. It was the sun, and the Earth was revolving around the sun. Why is this idea important in relation to Kant? Well, let's look again at this question. This is one of the most important questions which critique addresses. How does the object and the mind relate? Remember we talked about it last time. An object always prior to Kant was supposed to be the center of our investigation. So when we think about our mind and we think about the object, it still is kind of traditional way of looking at it for most people. The object is out there, and whatever it is, we're getting it from the object, and we're trying to understand the object, and we're trying to perceive it in a correct way. So for example, this marker, right? How do I know there is this marker? Well, I look at it, I touch it, I weigh it, and I get some sort of an idea. So I'm assuming the marker is actually there as an entity, and what I'm trying to do is to get the correct understanding of it using my natural capacity. Now, Copernican turn, which Kant has introduced, can be described as follows, and he actually talks about it in the introduction himself. Let's turn it around. Kant decided to look at the mind as the center and not the object. So the basic idea here is this. How about it is the mind which actually helps us to make the object? Not just to understand the object, not just to perceive the object, but to actually generate it. Now, that could seem like it comes dangerously close to Berkeley, to Berkeley's idealism, to saying that there are really no objects, just in ideas. And this is how Kant was first perceived. In fact, his A edition of Critique, written first in 1781, many people thought was very, very similar to Berkeley. Now, Kant himself was very upset about that, and he rewrote the whole thing. He made major changes to it, and he came up with the so-called B edition. In 1787, 6 years later, he issued the B edition, and changes he made were specifically meant to explain that his point is different from Berkeley's. Very different from Berkeley's. In fact, this is what is going on there, according to Kant. Not just the mind constitutes the objects, and not just the object constitutes something for the mind. It's a two-way street. The object provides the matter of experience, what our senses perceive. The mind has the form, the necessary form which is there in order for us to be able to perceive the object. So, you cannot understand the object by itself. The mind is part of the process. The mind does indeed in a way generate the object, because in order to understand the object, the mind has to use a particular elements within it. It's kind of like a mental software in a way, and these elements are there to begin with. Now, when he goes on into a little more detail, he explains that the two forms of intuition, as he calls it, which are there in our mind as soon as we are born are time and space. These are essential conditions in order to understand objects around us and ourselves. Space is the form of outer intuition, and time is a form of inner intuition. Space is how we perceive the objects around us, and time is how we perceive ourselves. Now, here's the most important thing. These two forms are not part of the objects themselves. He actually does make a separation here, and this is a very important separation. He says that we never know the object as it is in itself. The thing in itself. Something which we can think of about, I guess, in this way. Suppose there is the object in itself, or the thing in itself. Somewhere out there. But it's not in space and it's not in time. Why is space and time part of the picture? Where do they come from? The mind. The mind generates them. This is how the mind perceives the object. This is part of the mental software necessary in order for the mind to understand the object. Now, the thing in itself is not in space and it's not in time. There is another element to that. Once the object gets this matter of experience in the form of space and time, it additionally uses what is known as categories. Categories of understanding, which Kant specifically lists in the book, and most of them he has taken from Aristotle and from logic, but he somewhat developed it even further, and he says this is indeed part of our mental software necessary in order for us to understand any objects whatsoever. We cannot see the object as it is in itself without the use of these three: space and time as intuitions, and categories as a kind of a mental software which is applied to these intuitions. Now, that can be explained with the following example. Cookie dough and the cookie press. The object gives us matter of experience which our senses perceive. That is kind of like a cookie dough. Our mind uses the categories as a kind of a cookie press in order to shape this into objects. This is how we get the object. It's a combination of this matter, which is like a cookie dough, and a form, which is like a cookie press. Once it has been pressed together in a particular way, you get the object, which then is how our mind perceives it. Now, once again, he is saying that if somehow we could perceive the object without these conditions, we would know it as a thing in itself. But we cannot do this because this is a necessary part of our mind. This is something which we cannot understand objects without.